Hello, YouTube. This is the God of 0,000, and I've got something to say. There are some animes that are so fantastic that they launch fads, genres, and in some depressing cases, lifestyles. Yes, cosplayers. But the point is, some series can drive people to the point of fanaticism, myself included. I'm going to talk about one of them. No, not that one. Nobody was also dubbed by 4Kids. Yu-Gi-Oh! Yes, Yu-Gi-Oh! The second worst dub in anime history. Now, before I go off on a rant about 4Kids, I'm going to make a promise right now. This is going to be a review of the legitimate Japanese version and the manga only. Well, there can never be enough 4Kids flames out there. Too many people are so focused on what 4Kids did to Yu-Gi-Oh! That they don't actually talk about the series itself. And because of this, people are hard-pressed to find reviews of the actual series. But don't worry, I'll leave 4Kids for later. So with that taken care of, I've got something to say about Kazuki Takahashi's Yu-Gi-Oh! First, let's take a look at the genius author Kazuki Takahashi. Takahashi, in my opinion, is one of the most interesting authors and artists in Japan. Often portrayed as a smoking bachelor/bum, Takahashi always finds a way to use the simplest stories and situations in his work. In fact, Seto Kaiba, one of his most popular characters, was based off of a real person. It's no surprise Takahashi is a lifelong gamer. He and his two best friends, well, at least I think they're his best friends, Akira Ito and Naoki Kageyama, often hang out together, tossing around story ideas, sharing artwork, and of course playing games. Takahashi even let Ito and Kageyama write their own Yu-Gi-Oh! Spin-off mangas. As for Takahashi's career, I think the Shonen Jump editors pretty well describe it, saying, quote, "Artist/author Kazuki Takahashi first tried to break into the manga business in 1982, but success eluded him until Yu-Gi-Oh! Debuted in the Japanese weekly Shonen Jump magazine in 1996. Yu-Gi-Oh's themes of friendship and competition, together with Takahashi's weird and wonderful art, soon became enormously successful, spawning a real-world card game, video games, and 2 anime series." End quote. By the way, Pokemon came out in 95 only as a video game and wasn't that popular yet. So as amusing as they were, Little Kuribo's jokes on this particular subject weren't exactly accurate. Hey, I'm just saying. Anyway, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is the story of a 10th grader who... There is actually a purpose to that. Speaking of Little Kuribo, in his review of the first chapter of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Manga, he called Yugi a fist magnet. Well, he's actually right. Yugi is a weak, timid kid who lives with his grandpa Suguru Kumoto. He spends his time trying to solve the supposedly cursed Millennium Puzzle and cowering before every bully that lumbers by. It's actually something that doesn't really show through in the anime since it starts in Volume 8 of the manga, or Volume 1 of Duelist. Okay, so there is a Season 0, as it's called, that's loosely based off the first 7 volumes of Yu-Gi-Oh! But it's just so bad. Well, anyway, as I was saying, Domino City is actually one of those inner city sort of settings that produce all sorts of charming thugs, scam artists, and even warring street gangs. Oh, right! How could I forget about the good old Chop Man? Don't remember seeing him in the 4Kids version, did ya? You're right. I'm sorry. Well, anyway, when Yugi is threatened by one of the more dangerous bullies at Domino High School, yeah, He's suddenly able to solve the Millennium Puzzle in less than a night. Actually, Yugi had been working on the puzzle for 8 years. Immediately, Yugi is possessed by a malevolent spirit who proceeds to rip apart the minds and souls of anyone who dares cross little Yugi. Who? Oh, you mean Dark Yugi. Actually, that's another thing that doesn't show up in the anime. I guess the lesson here is that if you want the actual Yu-Gi-Oh experience, you have to read the manga. In the beginning, Dark Yugi, or Yami in the English version, is actually a wicked and vengeful spirit that takes bloody revenge whenever something happens to Yugi. As the story progresses, you actually find out that he's a... Oh, you're right. Well, pretty much everyone knows he's a pharaoh, so I can say at least that much. But trust me, there is a lot more to the story than that. Anyway, in the beginning of the story, Yugi only has one friend, Anzu Mizaki. You know, Taya Garter. Because it makes so much sense to turn Anzu Mizaki into Taya Garter. Anzu is a kind-hearted but very strong girl in Yugi's class. Yugi immediately fantasizes about seeing her panties. Anyway, that aside, by the end of Chapter 1, Yugi makes friends with one of his former bullies, Ketsuya Jinochi. Actually, that's something 4Kids got right. Well, given a loose definition of the term. I mean, come on. How many English speakers would be able to say Jinochi on their first try? Jinochi is basically a street thug, turned good Samaritan, turned card player, and Yugi's best friend. The other character in Yugi's little circle of friends is Harito Honda, or Tristan Taylor, another fantastic name change. Honda doesn't really play much of a big role. Little Karibo pretty much gets it right when he portrays him as the brainless comic relief character. A few other people eventually join the group, but the only really important character is Shizuka Jinochi, Jinochi's sister. One of the things I've always loved about Yu-Gi-Oh! Is their rogues gallery. Yu-Gi-Oh! Sports some of the darkest, craziest, and evilest villains anyone's ever come up with. Shut up, invisible sidekick. But all joking aside, the first serious villain that shows up in Volume 2 would make Hitler run away crying. The most famous of these villains is Seto Kaiba. Well, he's more of an anti-hero. Kaiba is the teenaged billionaire CEO of the Kaiba Corp Gaming Company, which he took over by killing his stepfather. Long story. Kaiba eventually becomes a begrudging ally, sort of. Kaiba is fierce, determined, and really cold, which is actually quite well portrayed by his icy blue eyes. The next major villain that comes into play is Bakura. He's basically a psychotic, superpowered tomb robber, with a British accent, thanks 4Kids. Bakura is clever and wicked to a fault. Not someone you'd want to meet in a dark alley. Nice, Yugi. Anyway, the last villain I'm going to introduce is Merrick Ishtar, a crazy, superpowered tomb keeper. Now, when I refer to Merrick Ishtar as a villain, I'm more talking about his dark side, and less about his more humane side. Dark Merrick is, without a doubt, the most evil villain ever. I mean, there's some real villains out there, in stories and in real life. But I tell you, Satan would have trouble keeping up with this guy. Well, you're going to have to wait until next time to find out on I've Got Something to Say, episode 1.5.